Hello, I'm State Senator Jamie Eldridge. Welcome to another edition of Half Hour on the Hill. I'm very honored to be joined by Patricia Montez, Executive Director of Centro Presente. Patricia, thanks so much for coming on to Half Hour on the Hill.
Senator, thank you for having me.
We've worked together for quite a while on issues related to immigration reform and supporting different immigrant communities. And I'm wondering if you could just tell for the audience, what is Centro Presente, what is its mission, and what is the work of Centro Presente?
Sure, Senator. Centro Presente is a community-based organization that has been around for more than 35 years, working with the Latino immigrant community. Most of our members are people from Central America. We work with documented immigrants, but we also work with undocumented people. And the mission of Centro Presente is to advocate for better public policies around immigrants and immigration at all levels, local, state, and federal level. And we also do transnational work because it is very important for us to think about immigration as an issue that is a global issue, and that we need to hold accountable not just the U.S. government, but also our governments in our own countries of origin. And part of our analysis as our organization is that we need to change policies in our own countries too. Policies that are generating forced migration from Latin America to the U.S.
Absolutely. And you talk about forced migration. And I think recently you were leading a delegation down to Mexico and Honduras to look at the conditions that people are living in and why people perhaps are coming to the United States. If you could talk a little bit about what you saw and what the experience of many migrants are experiencing.
That is correct. As I said before, most of our members are from Central America. And right now, people are coming because the terrible conditions that countries like Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador are facing right now. Usually, during the 80s, people were coming to the U.S. from Central America because the civil conflict there. But now they are coming not just because economic reasons. They are coming because, unfortunately, there is a lot of violence in Central America right now. According to the UN, Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador are the most violent countries on the planet right now. And as I said before, it's not just economic reasons, it's also violence that is the number one factor that is pushing people to come to the United States without proper documentation. And people are desperate right now in Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. I'm from Honduras, and Honduras right now is one of the most dangerous countries for journalists and for activists, for a lot of people that are fighting for better conditions in their own countries.
And if I could ask, what are some of the causes or reasons why there's so much violence in those countries?
There are many reasons, but unfortunately there is a lot of corruption there, impunity, structural poverty, structural violence, and that violence, in our opinion, has multiple phases. It's not just, for example, in El Salvador, the gangs and the organized crime, narco-activism. There are a lot of people that are suffering because of all these reasons and trying to escape and trying to come not just to the United States, but also other countries around the world. People are leaving to Spain, trying to leave to Spain and trying to leave to the south too. And other countries trying to move because they are, basically trying to save their life. And in 2014 there were a lot of kids that were coming to the United States. It was actually a crisis. According to the data, 67,000 unaccompanied minors were trying to come to the United States, enter the United States without proper documents, without talking about the ones that were coming with parents.
And that gets into sort of how the United States is interacting and treating those who are fleeing from Central American countries like Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, and you and I have been critics of United States immigration policy. If you could talk a little bit about how is the United States government treating families, often mothers and children, who are fleeing and coming to the United States, and what do you think needs to be changed there?
Well, there are two things that I think is important to mention. Number one, what are the reasons that are behind forced migration that I already mentioned, but I think it's important to also understand what is creating poverty. What is behind poverty? What is behind structural violence? And I think that is very clear that the economic policies, social policies, that not just the U.S. but other governments also in our countries of origin have been implementing in the region are not necessarily policies that are supporting ordinary people in our countries of origin. These policies are creating more poverty, and they are concentrating wealth in a few hands, in the hands of rich people, the elites, and the corporations, and not necessarily supporting poor people. In my country, Honduras, for example, 80% of the population live in extreme poverty. So that's something that is not right. So, and I think it's important to change the economic system and have an economic system that is, that is fair and that also cares about ordinary people, not just about corporations. That's the number one issue that is very important. The second thing is about the policies that, again, not just the U.S. government have been implementing, but also our own governments and our own countries of origin. Unfortunately, the governments in the region have been implementing policies that are based in, punishing people, undocumented people, and also militarization. And they are militarizing more, not just the U.S. and Mexico border, but also the border in Guatemala and other countries is being militarized. And I think that that's a wrong strategy, because what people need is more opportunities, more jobs, and instead of more detention centers. And they are investing a lot of money in building detention centers, deporting people. And we're talking about mothers, we're talking about workers, we're talking about children. And I think it's important, not just for the U.S., but for the entire region, to change these policies and think more about the people, not just the corporations and making money about because the suffering of these people.
And I think it's an interesting point talking about United States policies, including economic policies, is that there's a big discussion now about free trade agreements, and allegedly that jobs that were in the United States are moving to Mexico or Guatemala or Honduras or other Central American countries because the labor is cheaper. It's people are paid less. Is that anything that you've seen where actually by jobs moving to Central American countries that's improving the economy in those countries?
Absolutely not. I think the problem is that there is these policies are part of a bigger system, of course, the economic system. All these free trade agreements that in the end are not free. I think they are free for the corporations, but not for the people. The problem is that it's not just workers here from the United States that are suffering because they are taking the jobs. The workers in our countries are also suffering because they are not treated in the appropriate way. They are also exploiting them. And who is winning again are the corporations. And it's not like, there is a famous book that said immigrants are taking our jobs. And that's not true, It's actually the corporations that are taking the jobs of American workers, and they are going to our countries to exploit people.
And so when some of these individuals or families that are exploited, flee their Central American home and they come to the United States, and some are coming to Massachusetts, how is Centro Presente helping those families? What sort of things are you doing?
We do a lot of work. We provide legal advice to undocumented people. We used to have a worker center where people can learn about their rights as workers, as human beings in the United States, their constitutional rights, their worker rights. But we also try to do advocacy, and we also try to do organizing and educate them about their rights, but also give to them the tools to fight for their rights in the United States, because I think it's very important to provide services. People need them. People need to learn English. Like me, I migrated to the United States with a lot of privilege because I came with my documents, but English is my second language. I still learning the language. We also do that, but at the same time, I think it's important to empower them, because we need to fight. We need to fight for better policies, not just here in the United States, but also in our countries of origin. We see migration as a global issue that is affecting the entire region, and governments need to see that and implement policies that are, going to change the situation in the entire region.
Absolutely, and you talk about workers' rights, and I think that's sometimes something that a lot of Massachusetts residents don't properly understand, is that if someone, whether they are documented or they're undocumented, often employees are mistreating them, they're not paying them the wage that they owe, and then if the worker, protests, then the person is fired or be threatened with deportation. Are those sort of some of the things you're seeing with the communities that you're trying to help?
We see that all the time because that's a reality that people are facing, and unfortunately, labor exploitation is also a systemic problem. Again, not just in the United States, it's also a problem in our countries of origin because corporations are making money with vulnerable workers, right? That are giving cheap labor, and that is, of course, helping the economic system. Unfortunately, I think that right now with the entire team of the election, we can see that we have electoral candidates that are actually being very, very negative and using xenophobic rhetoric against a particular group of immigrants, in this case Latinos. And it's not just about policies and labor exploitation, it's also about the rhetoric that is very negative against undocumented people in the U.S. And I think that people in the U.S. should have more information and better information about what are the policies that this country, this government, have been implementing for decades in Latin American countries, and understand a little bit more the reality, the connection between these policies and forced migration. As I said before, in the past, people used to come to the U.S. looking for better opportunities, looking for work. But now it's because, in the case of Central Americans, is because people are desperate, and because violence is extremely high, the rates of violence in countries like Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. And unfortunately, the policies that this country have been implementing there has a lot to do with this reality.
Absolutely. So we've talked about sort of the global view and the national view between countries. So we're gonna take a break, and then I want to talk about what you're working on at the state level for state legislation. So we're going to take a break, and then we'll be back shortly with the next edition of Half Hour on the Hill.
They said I have troll teeth.
That my voice sounded like a possessed baby doll.
That no one would ever love someone as stupid as me.
That I was fat, ugly.
Disgusting.
The effect of bullying is potent.
We will no longer be the silent majority.
Now, when you see online bullying, there's something you can do about it.
We're gonna take action with the I.
I am a witness.
I am a witness.
I am a witness.
I am a witness.
I am a witness, and so are you.
So we're back for the second half of Half Hour on the Hill. I'm State Senator Jamie Eldridge. Been talking with Patricia Montez from Centro Presente. And Patricia, we talked about some of the global and national impacts and policies with respect to immigration and immigrants. I want to talk now about some of the state legislation that Centro Presente is focused on. And I've been the lead sponsor of the Massachusetts Trust Act for past 2 terms. And if you could talk a little bit about the Massachusetts Trust Act and sort of what you're seeing with people that you're fighting for in terms of their interactions with police and sort of immigration officials in general.
I'm going to start by saying that it's very important to change public policy at the local and state level too. Sometimes we tend to think that it's just important to change public policy at the national level. And I think that working with elected officials at the local level, people like you, is very important. Again, not just to change public policy, but also to educate people about why immigrants are coming to our cities. And for Centro Presente have been very important to be working with other community organizations, because it's not just Centro Presente, as you know, that has been advocating for the Trust Act. It's a coalition that is conformed by many other organizations and allies that have been working for years in order to change public policy in Massachusetts. And the Trust Act is a piece of legislation that is very important because at the State House here in Massachusetts, we can make a lot of changes. And as you know, why the Massachusetts Trust Act is very important, because unfortunately detentions and deportations are the most I will say important thing for this administration. Unfortunately, they have been
And a
detained.
higher amount by the Obama administration than
Absolutely.
previous
The
administrations,
Obama
right? Yep.
administration, Senator, as you know, has basically a record in detentions and deportations. The legacy of the Obama administration is going to be almost 3 million people detained and deported, and most of them are Latinos. Most of them are people from Latin American countries, Mexico, Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador, and Dominican Republic, according to national data. So the problem that we have with the detentions and deportations is that most of the people that they are detaining and deporting are people with non-criminal convictions. And according to the message that is coming from the White House is that they are going to focus just on people that represent a threat to the national security, a threat to the U.S. society. However, again, the data shows that most of the people that they are targeting, detaining, and deporting are people with non-criminal convictions. So that's why we have been advocating for the Trust Act.
Absolutely. And if I could just add a local story to that is here in Acton there was a Brazilian family that had their apartment raided by Homeland Security, and she didn't have a criminal record, but was undocumented, and that's absolutely contrary to the secure communities or priority enforcement. The Obama administration is saying they're supposed to be focused on undocumented immigrants who perhaps have a violent criminal history, but actually they're more often not deporting people that are here to provide a better life, very hardworking, and that's very concerning for how that impacts not only that family but the entire sort of immigrant community and communities across Massachusetts.
I agree, and there are a lot of people that said, you're defending criminals, and for your audience, I just want to say that we understand. I mean, I am an immigrant. I live in Boston, and I don't want to live around criminals too. We are very clear and we're conscious that if we see a person from our community that committed a violent crime, that's why we have a system in place. That person needs to go to court. We're not defending criminals, right? We're defending people with non-criminal convictions, mothers, children, workers, people that are fighting, that are also trying to contribute for the well-being and of this country, and we need to fight for them, and that's why we're trying to empower them and see if we can fight for better public policies at the local level.
And one of them obviously is the Trust
The
Act.
Trust
So how do you feel that would improve, as the bill's name suggests, improve trust between police and immigrant communities?
I think it helps a lot. These past 2 years, we were able to work in different cities, like, for example, Boston and Somerville, the city of Cambridge. And I think that one of the most important things is that the community is not going to be afraid to call the police to report crime. They are not going to be afraid to go to the police and talk about, if they have a problem at the school, if they have a problem, because they are not going to be afraid that they are going to be detained and deported just based on their immigration status. And I think that that's exactly a society that we want to see. We don't want to live in fear. We don't want to see the immigrant community or the community in general being afraid of the immigrant community or vice versa.
Exactly.
Exactly.
And it improves public safety for everyone, because someone, if they are immigrant, if they are undocumented, but they see a crime happening, they're going to feel comfortable to report it to the police, and therefore improve public safety for everyone.
Absolutely. I think that nobody, living in our cities should be afraid to call the police. I don't want to be afraid to call the police, and I don't want to see my community being afraid. If they need to call the police, they should call the police and feel comfortable. And I think that that's the kind of behavior that we are trying to change, and passing policies like the Trust Act is going to help us, as you're saying, not just the immigrant community, but the entire community to feel more safe and secure.
Absolutely. And so the Trust Act would limit detentions for some undocumented immigrants?
It's going to limit, but I think it's important to also understand that, anti-immigrant rhetoric, anti-immigrant people have been saying that, the Trust Act is limiting the police, is limiting the connection between the police and immigration. And actually, it's not ending that connection. The Trust Act does not end the connection with the police and immigration. What it's doing, is basically putting a limit because they are not going to detain and deport people who do not have criminal convictions. We're talking about people that are here for work, right? And not to be like, they are not criminals. When we talk about criminals, the police still have that connection with immigration. They know their immigration status, and if that person is committing crimes, they can definitely going to be able to identify the person, detain the person, and deport the person.
Absolutely. And yet, unfortunately, so many of the deportations are those that are here working hard, providing perhaps a better life for their family, haven't broken any laws, but they're still getting deported.
Absolutely. That's why we need to change policies at the local and state level, and of course, we need an immigration reform that is going to help, to change this situation that unfortunately, right now being an undocumented immigrant in the United States is like being a criminal, and that's very unfair.
Absolutely. And you mentioned earlier is that Centro Presente does do advocacy on national immigration reform. So if you could talk a little bit about that advocacy and what you're hoping to see perhaps in the next Congress and with the next president.
Yes, I think that's very sensitive because we need to see what is going to be the result of the next election. So we have been doing a lot of work for years. We are part of two big coalitions at the national level. We have been advocating with them for an immigration reform. We will see what is going to happen. We are very critical with both parties. We are actually not advocating for any particular candidate. We are fighting for justice, and I think we had to see what is going to be the result. Unfortunately, the Obama administration has a record in detentions and deportations. We will see what happens with both candidates. Of course, one of them is very extremely negative about immigration, particularly against, he has been, making some statements against Latinos, and we will see what's going to happen. But of course, we're going to continue fighting for an immigration reform here in the United States.
For a path to citizenship.
Absolutely, yes, but also an immigration reform that is going to be connected with international policies, because we don't see immigration as an issue that is just affecting people in the United States. As I said at the beginning, immigration is a global issue. You see what is going on in Europe with refugees. I think it's a global issue. I think that immigrants from everywhere are telling us that the global economic system is not working. People are moving around from many places, and I think that when I see them, I see people that are desperate, and they are like a sign. They are a clear sign that there is something that is not working, that is not fair, and that not just the U.S. government, but also governments in Latin America and Europe need to work together to change that dynamic.
Absolutely. And one of the things I sometimes talk about is that the United States provides economic assistance to other countries. It has trade policies that impact the economy of other countries. If those policies were changed, so say the standard of living in Central American countries was improved, that would have an impact on immigration. Do you believe that?
Absolutely, 100%. I think that if we change policies, like economic and social and political policies there, we're going to see a change. If in fact, the policies are helping ordinary people, not just the elites. Because otherwise, if we continue implementing the same recipe, we're going to see the same results. And I think it's important to change it. The U.S. have been, supporting financially, I will say my country, for example, many countries, of course, but I'm from Honduras, and I feel more authority saying it. And unfortunately, in Honduras right now, there is a lot of corruption and impunity. And I think that it's important to monitor if the U.S. government continue giving financial support, to monitor if that government is using that money to support, poor people in my country. Because otherwise, because the system is so corrupt, it's not going to do anything to support ordinary people there.
Absolutely. So Centro Presente really, there's the local, there's the state, federal, and even a global analysis and action.
Absolutely. We don't see immigration as something like, okay, we need to change policy at the local level. I don't think it's disconnected because people that are coming here to Boston are coming from Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador, Mexico, most of them. And all these global policies are connected with the work that we're doing at the local level. And I think it's important for people to understand what is going on in Central America, that we have a lot of Salvadoreños, people from Honduras and Mexico living in Massachusetts. And I think it's important to understand that.
Absolutely. Do you feel like the voices of immigrants are becoming louder, and do you feel like elected officials are better understanding those struggles, or do you think there's more work to be done?
I think it's both. I think that we have a lot of people that are being more involved, telling their stories, but we also need to do a lot of work. I think that for me, I always said that it's very important to do advocacy and change policies, but it's also extremely important the work that we have to do around education. We need to do more education with elected officials, and actually we have been doing with a national coalition that the name in Spanish is Alianza Americas, some trips. We're sending people to Central America, to Mexico, and I think it's important for them to see the reality, and these delegations are conformed not just by advocates, but also for elected officials. And we are actually going to invite you and other elected officials at the State House and see if they can go there and have meetings and conversations with people that are being deported from Mexico, from the United States, also conversations with members of the government and civil society organizations there in order for them to understand what's the reality that these countries are facing.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your advocacy. Thanks for coming on the show and talking about what you're working at all different levels of government. And I want to thank people for tuning in for Half Hour on the Hill. My guest today has been Patricia Montez, Executive Director of Centro Presente. Thank you.